Hello, everyone, and welcome to the iSpring Solutions webinar series, where every week we talk about e-learning trends, share iSpring tips and tricks, and cover clients' cases. My name is Paulina. I'm the community manager at iSpring, and I will be the moderator for today's webinar, where we will be talking about how to beat writer's block and consistently create unique training scripts. And I'm super excited about our guest presenter today because it's Andrew Barry, the CEO and founder of Curious Lion, the company where he and his team create custom video-based learning solutions for clients across industries. Hi, Andrew. What's up?
Hi, Paulina. Great to be back.
Yeah, exactly. So Andrew already did a session for iSpringers where he was sharing his tips and tricks when working with video content and some creative moments of actually creating it. So everybody just loved this session, and I hope that today's webinar will be also very useful to you guys, and you will be able to use some of the tips that Andrew will share right after the session and get creative and just get going with creating your training. And at this point, I would also like to mention that this session is being recorded, so no worries, you will receive a link to a replay sometime after the webinar. However, here I would like to encourage you to stay till the very end because it's an awesome opportunity to address your questions directly to our presenter. And to do so, please submit them in the question box, which you will find on the right side of the GoToWebinar panel. So at this point, I would like to encourage you guys to get ready for the very interactive session. And Andrew, I'm passing the mic over to you as well as the presenter rights.
All right. Thank you, Paulina, and thank you to everyone who's joined. As Paulina said, I'm Andrew Barry. Let me just quickly set up the screen share here. And yes, I'm the founder of Curious Lion. So we are a training content strategy, design, and production company. And so we help clients create and refresh their custom training that's unique to their organization, their values, their people. I'm really excited to be back here again. I did a great session, which I really, really enjoyed about a month or so ago, where we looked at so Paulina mentioned we do a lot of video-based training. It's not the only thing we do, but it's probably the specialty. And in any good blended training approach, video is an important role. So we spend a lot of time talking about the specifics, things you can actually do on the video side. And I get a lot of questions after doing that about, okay, but how do I, as a learning designer, how do I write the scripts for those videos? How do I, because often it's not us that are creating it, right? We, as a company, also outsource all of that to really good production companies. And you've got probably within your company a similar arrangement, either an internal production team or you outsource that production work, but you've got to give them the scripts and the brief to be able to create really, really impactful training. And if you're running a learning organization, you've got a team of people that are doing this, I want to share some tips of how we go about this and really try and make it as practical as possible so that you can maybe give some pointers and leave with one or two nuggets that you can share with your team as well. So as Paulina said, I'll have some questions at the end. If you've got anything come up during the presentation, feel free to post it into the chat. Paulina and her team will be monitoring that, and I'll also keep an eye on it as well. So let's concentrate onto the webcam closed. Perfect. Thank you, Paulina. And you can see my screen, right? It looks like it. Yeah. Okay. So before we get started, actually, Paulina, can we bring up that poll? I want to get a sense of who's out there, and in terms of your guys' experience creating scripts for learning videos.
Is that the one? Correct one?
That's the one. Thank you.
Okay, awesome. If you guys could take a moment and share with us your experience with script writing for video, that'd be awesome. So I think we will allow about like 10 more seconds, right?
Yep. yeah, just see which one best fits what applies to you. Just want to get a sense of the experience levels and roles of the audience. Yeah, we've got a pretty big group, which is exciting.
Yep. So I think I can close the poll right now to see the results that we have
All right, let's check it out.
and share them.
Okay, great. So we've got the practitioners here. We've got everyone who's actually writing the scripts, which is great. Some people who've never scripted a video, but assume that you're interested in finding out how to do that. Most of you, the majority seems like scripted a few, and then a good 21% here that have scripted many. So that's awesome. As we get into this, I'm going to give you a second in a little bit to kind of think about a topic that you, and I think this was part of the communications that went out before this. I want to make this really practical for everyone. And as we go through it, I want to sort of encourage you to jot down your thoughts as it applies to your topic. So we'll talk about that in a second. But before we dive into that, I want to sort of level set where we begin when we start scripting. And we at Curious Lion call it a course brief. I'm sure all of you have different terms for this, and needs analysis is another common one. But essentially, we want to know 4 things, right? The audience, so who's the course targeted at? Most crucially, what's their prior level of knowledge in this topic? And what current behaviors are that require change. What's the objective? So what are the future desired behaviors that we want to encourage in people? How's that learning going to improve their job? And what are the overall objectives for the course? The behavior change I mentioned before. And then finally the scope. And the scope is really the content, right? So that's where, and we do a long process of really immersing ourselves in the client's content. I'm sure all have different ways of doing that, but you really want to get your head around all the type of content that's there. And then what we do is we break that down into first principles. So we'll implement the sort of 5 whys approach, and we do a lot of interview-based interviews with subject matter experts to really get to the core of what that scope of that content is like. So this is what we're going into the scripting with, a very thorough understanding of audience, objective, the desired behavior change, and obviously the scope of the content. Okay, so I want you guys to take a minute and just think of a topic that you are working on, that you may be working on in the future. If you need a second to grab a pen and paper, I encourage just having that with you as you're listening and watching the webinar. Because I'm going to sort of prompt you as we go throughout of just things that you can start to think about. It's just a way for you to capture your ideas for that topic. So I'll give you about 30 seconds just to jot something down there. And at the moment, just write the topic name, anything else that might be relevant there with that.
And they don't have to send it in the chat just yet, right?
No. Although,
something.
yeah, you are more than welcome to. It will help me kind of respond to, to give specific examples that I can think of maybe that would be relevant to your topic. So feel free to do that by all means. That's a great point, Polina. I'm going to use a generic topic that would be familiar to everyone. We all attend meetings every day. We recently worked on a big project with a client where one of the topics we covered for them was how to deliver effective meetings. And I'm going to use that as kind of a broad topic to give some color to everything that we talk about today. But as we said as well, feel free to post in the chat there your topic as well, and I can see if
we do have some examples already.
Oh, awesome.
Like upselling at the front desk, for example, or team relations.
Nice.
Improving team decision making.
These are fantastic.
Teaching. Huh.
I'm not seeing these on my side, by the way, Polina.
Can you pull the questions off to the side from the menu?
It's in the questions.
Yeah, it's in the questions.
Okay, maybe it'll take a second to load up here. But those are all great topics, and I think it's going to be similar when we're talking about effective meetings as well. These are important, critical thinking skills, organizational skills, and these are great topics for writing training videos. So, all right. So if you've got that idea in your head, let's move ahead with the the content. So our starting point is picking a plot. Now this whole thing is about how to beat that writer's block. So all of my writers, I encourage them to we spend a lot of time thinking about these 7 basic plots and understanding what those mean for us. And then I encourage them to use this as a starting point. So if you guys are familiar, Christopher Booker wrote an excellent book on this topic and really summarized throughout history all these fantastic stories that really can be summarized into these 7 basic plots. So you've got the classic overcoming the monster. Can anybody think of examples as we go through these? If you can think of a story, a famous story that comes to mind, just post them in the chat as well. Overcoming the monster, a great one of that is Star Wars, like a classic, good versus evil. Rags to riches, so the protagonist is in a poor place, in a poor state of affairs, and they acquire power, wealth, love, all these kind of things. And a good example of that is Cinderella. The quest would be some kind of journey, some kind of objective that our hero sort of sets out on, and they face all these temptations and obstacles along the way. A great example of that obviously is the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Voyage and Return is kind of similar. There's no like very clear objective other than this voyage and a return. So they go and they sort of learn these new experiences in this foreign land, in a strange land. So Alice in Wonderland is a great example of that type of story. Then obviously we've got comedy, we've got tragedy. So the two like classic comedy like Bridget Jones's Diary, tragedy, Romeo and Juliet. So very, very clear in everyone's mind, those kind of stories. And then Rebirth is a sort of a character that's an antagonist, or that is we don't really like when we first meet them, and then they eventually change their ways and become a better person. And a classic Disney version of this is Beauty and the Beast. So once you've got like a sense of these 7 in your mind, I encourage my writers to pick one of these. And really, like, if you need, the biggest thing with writing is getting started and making that sort of first, putting your fingers on the keyboard or your pen to paper. And I find picking one of these, we can all relate to all 7 of these. And I always encourage them to try and pick the harder ones. Rags, the quest is quite a common one, and Voyage and Return, those are quite a bit more straightforward to do. But comedy, tragedy, these are challenging topics, and I always encourage them to like pick a new one and really challenge themselves. So that's the starting point. So for effective meetings, what we did was we chose Rebirth as the story, the plot line that we would use. Okay, so I'm gonna expand that out a little bit more as we go. But for your one, if you've got that topic in mind, it doesn't really matter which one you pick, because it's really kind of all I'm going to be talking about today is having a system to be creative. So it's going to be a system and a framework to kind of give you discipline and then allow you to be creative within that. So if you want to pick one of these for yourself, it doesn't really matter which one. Anything that jumps out, just kind of jot that down as well. Okay. Once you've got a plot, we then follow sort of, this is the archetypal plot arc. So in this, there are 5 key elements that you need to have, and it's helpful to, again, this is the system, right? This framework for being creative. So at the beginning, it's really just jot down your thoughts on each of these areas. So it kind of forces you to think about different aspects of the story you're about to tell. So who's the protagonist? What is their object of desire? And then what is the quest or journey that they're going to go through of discovery? Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it's voyage and return, right? It could be any one of these, but there'll be some kind of journey or some kind of quest that they go on. There will be obstacles along the way, and eventually there will be a resolution. So what we did for this project, effective meeting, so we were again doing the rebirth plot arc. We had a protagonist who was Nick, who was the head of product at the company. His objective was to release version 1 of their software on time. All right. His quest was to lead multiple teams and obviously then to run multiple team meetings to be able to meet this objective. Okay. The obstacles he faced along the way was an underperforming team, changing deadlines, sick team members, all the things that we've all experienced in our careers. And that list can go on for a long time. And then finally, the resolution that we wanted to get to was, obviously we would highlight the fact that we've chosen rebirth is, he was obviously not very good at actually conducting these meetings. So the resolution was going to be that he was going to learn the skills to effectively manage his team through meetings and eventually, release their product on time. And so now we've got just in a high level in our head these 5 things of how we're going to kind of piece this story together. Okay, so now we're sort of ready. We've done our prep work, and now we're ready to actually start putting our fingers to the keyboard. Okay, so to get started with the actual writing, we have a little checklist that we use internally. So at the very highest level, we want to make sure that our stories relate. All right, so they prompt learners to reflect on their own experiences. And that's really like, you want to get the learner to connect. So that the protagonist is a really good device for this. You want to make that person relatable so that, we can all identify with something within them. And then narrate. So we want to tell a story. I'm going to get into kind of some of the tools you can use. It's strangely scientific, like really preparing yourself to be successful and to be creative. But that's the goal, right? It needs to narrate, it needs to tell a story, develop characters to the extent that we can within the time we have. And then obviously demonstrate. We want to, especially for the more complex procedures and processes, invisible phenomena, as we call them, you want to make sure you demonstrate step by step how to do those things. And then also debate. So here we try and, we really kind of focus on misconceptions about a particular subject, and we try to showcase both sides of that. So, in effective meetings, there's essentially 4 sort of elements of an effective meeting. So psychological safety, empathy, accessibility, and execution. And we would, take people through each of those. But there's also pros and cons to certain elements within that. So you definitely want to make sure you tell a complete story, and give people, acknowledge different viewpoints. So I think that's important. So yeah, we use this as a sort of a high level checklist of criteria for our stories. Okay, so now where do we begin? And that's kind of the starting point. So you've prepped yourself with a plot arc, plot, and then the arc of that plot. You thought about your protagonist and objective and resolution and all that, and you've got this high level checklist. So how do you actually start writing? And for this, we borrowed some really great work by Ira Glass. I don't know if, for those of you not familiar with him, he started This American Life. He's a fantastic podcaster, storyteller, just a really, really interesting guy, and I encourage you to go. He actually talks about these 2 things on YouTube. You can actually look that up. So, but I find these really useful devices to just start, to just begin a story. And you never know exactly how the story is going to pan out, but you do want to give yourself a way to begin the whole thing. And so we used anecdotes and then moments of reflection. So the anecdote is a sequence of actions that create momentum in a story. They need to leave questions open, right? So, the person watching your video has some kind of, it begs questions in their head. And then, through these anecdotes, we try and tell something new. Okay, so an example of this would be she woke up, she thought of the conversation with her son last night. She got out of bed with purpose and she walked to his room. Right, so that's just a sequence of actions. There's a lot unsaid there. There's a lot, immediately you're thinking about what was the conversation they had about last night. What is she about to do? What is she suddenly resolved to do? So you've created that kind of context for people. In this effective meetings example, a good way to do this is having a scene where employees of this company, so Nick's team, are standing around a water cooler or sitting at lunch, and they're just complaining about how how ineffective the meetings are, or how behind they are in the project, or highlighting maybe some of the obstacles that we talked about at the beginning. And so immediately you sort of posing the problem, and the question then in the viewer's head is, okay, what's going on here? What's the root cause of this? And then potentially, what are solutions to this? And that's where the moments of reflection come in. So you make it a bit more explicit. So, those folks that aren't thinking like that, you kind of pose that question to them, so they are thinking about that. And so it supports the action. You're commenting on the action and answering some of the questions that are implied. So using a narrator, so scripting voiceover is a very useful tool for this, or a useful device. So you could have a scripted dialogue between these disgruntled employees, and then you could have a narrator that comes in and it's like, asking questions about that. Even just rhetorical questions, like what could be going on here? Let's check in with the head of this team, Nick, kind of thing. So just it keeps the action moving forward, but it's also getting the learner to think and to reflect on what's happening. And then you basically flip back and forth between this. So that when you think of it like that, it becomes a lot easier to piece together a story, because you just need to come up with an anecdote. So at one sequence of actions, and then pose the questions that you want answered about that, and then show the next piece of action. And slowly, by doing that, this is building blocks for a whole story. Okay. So I hope this is giving you all great ideas with the topics that you are currently working on. Okay, so once we've got now these building blocks are there, so how do we structure the story? How do we organize these building blocks in a way that makes sense and that gets the learner to the desired conclusion? And essentially, we will follow, and I'll explain now, but there's sort of 8 things that we'll incorporate into the structure. So the first one is the hook. Here we try and capture attention with shock or surprise or delight or fascination, suspense. So that what we just talked about now, that first anecdote could be your hook, right? Like this team, you can even get more dramatic. The team is really struggling. There's people quitting. Everyone's gossiping about why so-and-so quit. So you can really kind of create that suspense and drama about a scene, which is going to lead to this sort of explainer video about how to facilitate effective meetings. Once you've captured the attention, you want to signpost for the learner, what's coming next. And this is very, very important, and it's something you keep coming back to. So you sort of set the scene, you signal what's coming later, and it's like chapters in a book. So in this case, we would set that up, and once we've identified the problem, we might present a signpost and say, this team is desperately short of meeting their objectives for this project. And what Nick realizes that he needs to do a better job conducting effective meetings. And there are 4 ways that he can learn how to do a better job. And we can go through those: psychological safety, empathy, accessibility, execution. But we kind of step people through each of those 4 elements of an effective meeting. And so we keep coming back to the signpost so they can see what we've covered and what's coming next, and then what we've covered, what's coming next. So those 2, so the hook is at the beginning, the signpost you kind of use throughout. The next, from 3 to 7, these can be in any order. and you also don't all need to be there. But some of the things to be thinking about is facilitating attentive viewing. So you can engage the audience in any way, try and do that in your story. So it's not just, passive, so it's not just passive viewing, but it could be like this, where we have a live webinar and you can post chat comments and answer questions and the poll and that kind of thing. That's obviously a good example. But even just encouraging prediction, so writing into your script, like, what do you think happens next, or what do you think the problem could be? That it naturally triggers in someone's mind to think about that. So that's a good way to keep engaging the audience, and just to want to remind yourself to do that as much as you can. Then enable constructive learning. So we actually talked about this briefly on the first webinar I did, but this is all about managing the cognitive load of a learner. So not having too much text on screen, having using pictures where you can to replace words, using visual metaphors, scaffolding knowledge, all of those good things in the body of work. That's managing cognitive load. Sensitize means being consistent in your use of style, and that's everything from the music that you choose to the changes in the music and the sort of mood to change the mood. So you might also, like, as the topic changes, it may be kind of chaotic and frenetic at the beginning, and then as we start to learn how to conduct effective meetings and the team starts getting back on the road to success, then it can kind of have a bit more of a relaxing or resolution kind of style in the music. But it doesn't just have to be music. So this is just, if you have obviously your branding, your style within your content, you definitely want to make that consistent here, so people know, they're receptive to what you're telling them. So elucidate is really just to explain more complex topics. So that's explaining the logic, really kind of going into the details of things. This goes back to what we were talking about earlier, where we discussed those complex step-by-step descriptions of processes and procedures. So that's your sort of cue here to do that. And this part gets a little bit technical as well. So I'm happy to, if anybody's got any specific questions of that, to chat about that afterwards. And then reinforce. So this is one also comes back throughout as you make a key point, reinforcing that. And it's really important, as I think many of you know, is to repeat and then compare and contrast to really kind of reinforce points. So, it's all about going back to that brief, right? Knowing the prior knowledge of the audience. How can we scaffold this new knowledge on top of knowledge that they already have? How can we compare or contrast that with something they already know, so that they can start building connections for themselves? And then obviously repeating, space repetition, or all important principles to come across in that story. And then finally, you sort of conclude, and that's summarizing the key information, providing that resolution to the story. You definitely want to satisfy your audience with the payoff. And then very, very importantly as well, is providing links to additional resources. I'm going to be doing that at the end of this presentation. And definitely you want to be doing that throughout, because you want to, these days that knowledge is it's out there, and we can all self-learn. And so you want to direct your audience wherever, to whatever's relevant to them. So yeah, so lots going on there, but it's helpful to have this structure in mind, or in your workspace, just so that you're making sure it's kind of just acts as that visual reminder as you going back to the building blocks, as you're organizing those building blocks, you're thinking about all of these things, and are you properly signposting it? Are you engaging the audience? Are you not overloading them cognitively? So these are all kind of helpful reminders for that. Okay. And then lastly, so I've sort of covered a few sort of extra things that I wanted to talk about. They don't quite fit neatly into their own categories. but I wanted to spend a little time talking on these. So these are more practical, tactical tips, but just as useful. So the first one is convert long sentences into 2 or more short ones. That sounds kind of obvious, but when you're writing, especially a lot of what you're writing is for screenwriting, it's dialogue, right? It's dialogue or it's voiceover narration. But either way, it's someone speaking. And you'll find we don't tend to speak in very long, complex sentences. There's always a period, there's always, so it's definitely, it's just a helpful thing to go back, look at those long sentences, see how you can break them up into 2 sentences or more, and not string together long, using commas, making, very long paragraphs. So that's one useful one. Avoid using words that are difficult to say or hear. So like 7th theme is one. Last task or last task is things like that, where the voiceover artist is probably going to stumble on it. It's probably going to be difficult to understand. So just try and stay away from those kind of words. All of these, both of those first 2, I recommend is say what you're writing out loud. Say it to yourself, say it in front of a mirror. Does it sound right? Does it sound, and it's actually, this is going beyond just saying it in your head, which is, we can often rationalize, the thoughts as like, okay, that makes sense, but actually saying it out loud really can help you figure out, like, whether it's going to come across well in the video. And then, so the next one is, this is more like the writing process itself, the next few here. So be ruthless about killing parts that don't work. It's, so many times you write a long script, and we do a very thorough editing process within the company, and it's so important to be kind of ruthless with your own writing, to really kind of kill parts that don't work, revise it. Can you say it in a better way? That self-editing process is really such a crucial skill to learn, and is going to make you a better writer. It's obviously going to help with speed up the review process and all of that kind of stuff. So enable constructive learning. We've talked about that. That's the managing of the cognitive load. Make sure you're introducing information in a measured way. You're not overloading people with information. And then the last 2 are really just, this kind of overcoming the hurdle of becoming a really good writer, is write, record, produce as much as possible. The more you do this, the better you get. Every single script writer that comes on board with us starts at a point, where they get a lot of review notes and a lot of revisions that are required. And by the end, after a lot of iterations and just working on multiple projects, the more they do that, the better. It's really is a skill that you can learn quite quick. I wouldn't say quickly, but it has an exponential effect, that the more you do this, the more you kind of apply some of the principles that we've talked about, the better you're going to become at this. So I would definitely recommend that. And then trust the process. Really just sit down, and going back over what we talked about, come up with your building blocks, go, pick your plot, follow the plot arc, really just go through the process without being self-critical in the moment. So I mentioned in number 3, being, the self-editing skill. Don't do that while you're writing. Trust the process, write everything to completion, and take a break, and then come back and do the self-editing. That is without a doubt an important point there. I really can't stress it enough. Is just, really separate the 2, trusting the process of you writing, and then come back and sort of edit as well. Okay. How are we doing there, Pauline? Do we have any questions? I'm not seeing them on my side, so I'm going to have to rely on you.
Don't have any questions so far.
Okay, cool.
Let's wait till the Q&A.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so that's the process that that we follow, that I recommend. Again, I'm happy to take questions right now from you guys. What I've got for the rest of the presentation is couple of other important areas that you need to be aware of as someone who's writing for video. So I'm going to get into that now. And whenever I do this presentation to clients, and a lot of times I get these 3 questions. And so I wanted to address those now. I wanted to get thoughts from people as well. When to use video to begin with. And then if you're using video, when to use live video versus animation. And then an interesting one that keeps popping up is leaving an ending open to interpretation appropriate for learning? Let's actually start with that one. And we've got a poll here. Paulina, if you want to bring that up for us, please. I'd love to get your guys' thoughts on this and see where the group sort of stands on that last question.
Yeah, the poll is up, so you guys are welcome to take a moment and vote for whatever option you feel like is the correct one. So far, we have 74% saying it depends.
That's what I would have thought.
Yeah, let's allow a couple of, maybe like 10 seconds, and then I will close it and share the results with everybody. Okay, looks like almost everyone has voted, so let's close it right now and share the results.
Yep. All right. That's what I would have thought. So there's a slight edge in terms of the yeses versus the nos, and a few people putting a stake in the ground for that. So yeah, I mean, I think I tend to answer the it depends here. And those of you who answered yes or no, probably thinking of specific examples as well. And I think the way with this is like, if the ending is going to encourage some kind of additional learning, maybe some additional research even by your audience, then it's absolutely appropriate. But obviously, if you've left out something that is important to the topic you were addressing, then it's obviously not appropriate. So yeah, so I think that's well reflected with the group there. What about if anybody's got any thoughts on this? I want to pop up the chat feature there and give any thoughts on when to use video or when to use live versus animated video.
I think I can read this comment out loud. Debbie is saying a video is still a piece of earning that needs a firm outcome. It depends on what the outcome is trying to achieve.
Yeah, that's a really important point, and that's why in that course brief, one of those things is objective. We have to be very clear on what that objective is before we commit to using something like video. Another way I like to think of this is, you got another one there? Go for it.
Yeah, Don says video needs actors and those are not always handy. Animation is under our control. And also Alice says, I think it depends on what tools / budget you have available.
Oh yeah, those last 2 points are 100% right. Animation, you've got 100% creative control over the outcome, over the final asset. With live, you do, with good actors and good direction, you can definitely make that work. But often that also is a budget decision. To get really good actors and a good production crew in place is expensive. And sometimes animation's better. Animation also would be better for like complex, we talked about invisible phenomena earlier. That's also really much more effective way of showing processes and all that.
We also have a comment from Kimberly. I like 5-minute training videos. People have very short attention spans. And also Carolyn says, the important thing is that it is consistent in a series, not switching back and forth.
Yeah, so I think those are 2 very complementary points there that you've both raised, in that it allows you to create a very, confined is not the right word, but a very condensed nugget of information, 2 to 3 minutes, maybe 5 minutes. but then also string that together in a series. And that's typically how we work. We'll create bite-sized video series for clients. We also do this specifically in a blended approach in most cases. So I always say, when to use video. The answer to that is almost always if you can. There's a concept in multimedia learning called pre-training, and if you can prime your audience with definitions, concepts, examples to get them thinking about a topic, then you can use ILT time, live classroom time, much more effectively. Because, and that was this effective meetings example was exactly that. We created that video for this client. Everyone watched the video before coming to the session, and then they were able to get into very specific scenarios and case studies that allowed them to practice those skills. And then most crucially, to ask experts their questions, like specific questions about meetings that they've been in or specific thoughts they had about the video that they watched. And that's, I think, where the real power of video is in being able to prime an audience, and especially a remote audience, right? If you only can get them together once a year, or even if you can't, and you can only do live webinars like this, but having on-demand videos that people can watch before that to really prime them on a topic, it's just so important.
I would like to read just one more comment and then you can
Please.
move on. Debbie says it depends on who your learners are. Some more senior staff members do not like animation. It switches them off, but some parts of my business react well to it, which I think is kind of
Mm-hmm.
important to know who your audience is and how they will respond to this video content.
Yeah, that's again, that was in the course brief, right? Like that, your needs analysis. You've got to understand your audience, and I think that's a good distinction there, Debbie, between some animation can definitely it's not right for every audience. So I think that's that's something to play into. It's so all of these factors there. We actually put a resource together with sort of 9 things that you should ask yourself if you want to use video. So if you're struggling with that, I think I've included a link to it in this presentation actually. So you can download that PDF and it'll kind of take you through some of these points. And it's great to hear all those responses because it's very similar stuff to what we've put together. Okay, so moving along quickly, this is a list and there's a source here. I'm not going to go through each of these, but it's helpful when you're writing for videos to understand the terminology that the production company you're working with, or if you're doing it, this is probably a lot of this will be familiar to you, but it's quite helpful to really get a basic understanding of the terminology that for film, for writing, for screen. So things like high angle, low angle shots, tracking shots, framing, editing, the montage, transitions, all that kind of stuff. There's a great resource here. It's a university website where they put together a bunch of film terms and definitions. So you guys will get a copy of this at the end, and I encourage you to go to that and just give it a read through and see what pops out is interesting to you, and see if you can find out a little bit more about that, because the more you can be prescriptive in how you want that video to look, or your script to look on a video, the better product you're going to have. And I think that's again a key focus area for us at Curious Lion, is to be very clear about and develop really strong relationships with the production crews that we work with, production agencies we work with, because they need to, it's, that handoff is so important, right? You can write the best script ever, but if it doesn't get translated into film the way you wanted it to, that's kind of a waste. So it's very important to have that. I talked about a few of these things in my previous webinar with iSpring, but if you want to find out more about it, I definitely recommend that resource. And then a couple of other ones I can definitely point you towards. I think all of these are, except maybe the first 2, are available online. Yes, the second one might actually be, but so Kumi's book here, Designing Video and Multimedia for Open and Flexible Learning, is a fantastic resource and summary of a lot of some of the stuff that we've talked about, some of the stuff I talked about in the previous webinar, and a bunch of other things on how to design video. It's a very easy read. And yeah, so I definitely recommend that one. Mayer's book is so I talked about the like pre-training principle, and managing cognitive load. He goes into that and managing essential processing versus extraneous processing. So if you really want to get into the cognitive psychology of that and how it relates specifically to multimedia, he has a great book on that. I think there's like 12 principles. In fact, if you just Google his name and those principles, you'll find probably a good summary of those as well. That's a big core of our methodology, is the research that he conducted. This next one is a study that was done, so you can download the PDF there, how video production affects student engagement, and they're specifically looking at MOOCs. So there was actually some interesting observations there. It was fairly recently, as you can tell. And yeah, again, that one's a short-ish read, and also just broken up into the key areas. So I'd recommend giving that a glance and seeing if anything pops out at you. Again, picking up a few nuggets here and there will definitely help you become better at this. And then lastly, I mentioned, so we put together this document on 9 questions to help you incorporate video in your learning. So that's also just a helpful tool. I think it's a one or two pager with some questions and explanations around that. So this will be sent out to you afterwards, so you guys will have access to that link, those links, and yeah, I definitely recommend as a way to kind of dive deeper into some of these areas. All right, and then if you want to talk about this in any more depth, I really enjoy this stuff. I think it, live it, breathe it. I'm always looking to learn, and I find just having discussions with people about this gives me that opportunity. And yeah, so if you are passionate about this, if you have any specific questions about what I've talked about, you know, how you can apply it, if you want to bounce around some ideas, I'm always happy to do that. And you can reach me online at curiouslionlearning.com. That's also my email there, and phone number. So yeah, I think we have a bit of time left for any questions.
Thanks a lot, Andrew, for sharing this approach with our audience. We very much appreciate it. And before we move on to the Q&A session, I would like to make a couple of announcements. So first of all, I will be sharing the link to this presentation. In fact, I already did in the chat, but I will be sending a follow-up email with the link to the webinar session recording, as well as this presentation for your guys' use and replay at your own pace. Also, I would like to invite you guys to our next webinar that will be taking place on June 27th. We will be talking about how to start getting results through e-learning with our guest expert, Clint Clarkson. So I very much would like to encourage you to come to this webinar because it's going to be kind of amazing, I think, and I hope. And also for this purpose, I would like to share my screen very quickly. So this is the place where you can go and watch. First of all, you can sign up for any future sessions here. And also you can sign up for our email. The mailings that you're always aware of any upcoming sessions. And also here you can watch all the previous session, including the one that Andrea did in April. Here it is, by the way, sound and motion from School Techniques. Yep. And last but not least, I would like to mention that right now we have a special offer running, and you can save about $800 on iSpring Suite 3-pack license. If you would like to learn more about it, please let me know in the chat section. I'll be happy to point you in the right direction. And of course, right now it's also available actually on our website. Yeah, right here. So let me share, I will be sharing the link in the chat. And yeah, let's go to the questions right now. We do have questions from our awesome audience. So,
Yeah.
first of all, there's a question from Don. Where is the difference slash overlap between script story and screenplay with on screen visual action?
Yeah, so I'm going to share something else on my screen in a second to answer Don's question and Salim's question because I think those are related. I just want to pull that up. So I'm going to do that in a second. Let's just see. Okay, and then so that'll answer Don and Salim's questions. Debbie, so your question, yeah, so about structured, this is for structured videos and you make quick on the go videos. How do you approach this? So I'm glad you brought that up because it's actually a very similar approach. What we covered in this presentation is everything, right? It's a lot of pieces, you know, picking the plot, having the archetypal plot type, all that kind of thing. But it doesn't all have to be there, if that helps. So I always, you know, I always find with more on the go ones, you start to get into that rhythm of doing this by doing it with longer ones, and it allows you to be a bit more creative within that, if that makes sense. So you can still be on the fly coming up with things, but this framework just keeps you. It makes sure that you're following a you know, a logical and well researched approach. So I hope that answers that. It's definitely meant to be flexible as well. You know, we definitely will do something that's like 60 seconds for a just-in-time need, and not necessarily go through every single piece of this. But we might just, you know, have an anecdote and then a moment of reflection and then some kind of, you know, answer to that. So it doesn't have to all be there all the time. But this is just getting familiar with this process definitely helps. Okay, and I've got the team meeting. So I've got an example script here, and I'm gonna pull that up quickly. So just to answer the question, the difference between audio, visual, and Salim's question about scripted video, this is essentially just this is what it looks like. So, you know, we've got a scene, then a visual description, and then an audio description. This is everything we talked about today is filling out this. Okay, so where what I mentioned at the end about having, you know, coming up with common terms is where you can then describe in here that kind of, you know, you're describing the action. So this doesn't need to be a narrative or anything like that, but we can talk about, you know, what the viewer is seeing basically, and what they're hearing as well. Sometimes that's also baked into the script itself. And this one you can see we go between narrators and actual characters as well. So yeah, so there's nothing fancy. You know, it's really just your audio and then your visual description of it. And you can create these templates, I think, fairly easily yourself. And then we just, for ease of reference, kind of label them if it's animation, stock footage, or live action footage. So I hope that answers that question, gives you guys a few ideas. And then Tara's question, how do you make interviews with subject matter experts into an engaging video? I try to be hourglass, but always fail. Yeah, I mean, so he's got a bunch of great tips on that. I find with interview, the couple of quick tips, because I can go into this in a lot of detail, but one is, you know, having so instead of like a microphone in someone's face, I definitely recommend having, you can actually just use your iPhone. You get really, really good audio now. You can set up a mic on and have an iPhone there recording the person talking. If you live mic them up, even better. But you know, don't roll the camera from the beginning. I think that's the key to make it engaging. So you want your interviewee to be relaxed and to be themselves. And as soon as personality comes through, you've got a combination of personality, and then obviously they're an expert, so that's why you're interviewing them. Then the viewer is going to be engaged because they want to know the topic. This person knows a lot about it, and if that person's relaxed and themselves, then it becomes, you know, it just becomes a much more comfortable experience to watch that. So I'd recommend that as a tip. You just kind of have a conversation, you chat, you get the person relaxed, and then roll the camera. But almost like you almost can just sneakily roll the camera, like so that it's not this jarring event that people have to because people freeze in front of the camera and that can undo all the good work you've done. But then you're gonna capture all the answers to your key questions. So maybe try that, Tara, and see if helps you become an Ira Glass. PB, hi PB. How do you make all three styles work together? Very very good example. So again, I can go into this in a lot of detail, but we might use, for example, live action to set up a scenario, to make a realistic scenario. So we'll have people in an interview and we'll use live actors for that. But if there was a complex process, maybe it's like a meta cognition or some kind of, again, invisible phenomena, then we would introduce animation to then illustrate that. But it's critical then that it's not like a jarring difference between the animation and the stock footage or the live action. So having consistent color schemes and branding and all that makes it very important, ties it together. And then also within the animation, don't have multiple types of animation. So if you're going to do clean, minimal 2D vector type animation, then stick with that. If you're going to have 3D, complex character animation, then stick with that. So I think with that piece, animation, you stick with one, but being able to combine all three is definitely doable as long as you have a consistent theme or style, which I think was mentioned in one of these areas as well. Yeah, it's all about sensitizing. So it's a consistent use of style. Awesome. I hope that answers all your questions. Thank you for those. And like I said, if you have anything else that pops up after this, feel free to email me. Be happy to chat more about this. And thank you all for joining me.
Thanks to you, Andrew.
Thanks for having me, Polina.
Yeah, Cornelis says, thanks for the detailed outlines, widened my current horizon, checklist, and knowledge approach. Scripting, simple but great.
Awesome.
Okay. I think at this point we are ready to wrap up because there are no other questions coming in. If you guys liked this session, please share with us in the chat. That's very important to know. And also, if you didn't like anything in it, please share as well. You can also send any feedback to my personal email. I will be sharing it in the chat so that you can get in touch with me after the webinar with any questions you may have. Okay, paulina.ionina@iSpringSolutions.com. Okay, perfect. And thanks to you, Andrew, for this wonderful presentation and actually for sharing your expertise with our audience. That's awesome.
Absolute pleasure. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
All right, so yeah, guys, hope to see you at the next session about how you can start getting results from e-learning. And at this point, I would like to wish everyone a wonderful day. And yeah, see you at the next webinar. Bye, everybody. Bye, Andrew.
Bye-bye. Thanks, everyone.